everyone, and welcome to this lecture on disciplinary writing practices. Historically, writing has been a neglected part of curriculum in the United States, often taking the back seat to reading instruction. And for this reason, writing proficiency on nationalized standardized tests have often given less than desirable results. This is why a lot of people have actually been proponents of the Common Core state standards because they place a true emphasis on writing instruction, giving writing its own kind of subsection of the standards. Because if students are to make knowledge on their own, they must struggle with the details, wrestle with the facts, and rework raw information and dimly understood concepts into language that they can communicate to somebody else. So in short, if students are to learn new material, they really must write. And so the focus of this lesson is on being able to incorporate writing in meaningful ways that represent and honor the traditions of your particular discipline. Traditionally, though, we think of the bulk of writing instruction happening in our ELA classrooms. So this requires some shifts for teaching writing within the disciplines. We need to have students think about having students write something every single day related to your content area that goes beyond just asking students to write notes. This should be some sort of reflection, some sort of synthesis, some sort of analysis. We need to allow students to sometimes engage in written discourse with each other in the place of discussing content. We spent a few modules ago a lot of time on thinking about different conversation and discussion strategies. Many of those can be transferred to written form, which gives students the opportunity to practice that writing instruction as well. We also want to think about telling students early in the course that writing is a fundamental part of learning and that they should expect to write in your class. Setting that goal early helps to kind of establish for students what the norms are in the discipline. We want to provide students with opportunities to be able to use technology to support writing. So this can be something like blog posts where students have that collaborative element as well. We want to provide relevant tasks like real-world problems and authentic audiences whenever possible, enabling us to mirror the real work that's happening in your discipline. And that authentic audiences, the audience beyond the teacher, is one of the most challenging yet rewarding aspects that I want you to think about as we work through this module. Using writing also as a formative assessment to guide your instruction. So having students use an exit ticket or doing some sort of writing activity in the middle of your lesson that you can collect and then kind of use as data to assess student learning can become a really powerful kind of component of your day-to-day classes. You want to provide constructive feedback more than corrective comments. So we're not necessarily concerned about every single comma and every single misplaced modifier, but instead we're thinking more largely about content, about structure, and about how the students need to improve their writing to be able to communicate their thoughts more clearly. We also want to think about writing in maybe some non-traditional senses, so writing as drawing, as symbols, as multimodal construction, some of which we'll explore a little bit more in the next couple of modules, but we want to think of defining writing in broad terms. And then again, we always want to think back to how does it happen in our particular discipline. As I said earlier, we traditionally think about writing instruction happening in the English classroom. But oftentimes, a lot of the research shows that the writing instruction that's happening in English classrooms is very narrowly focused on very formulaic approaches that help students to be successful on standardized state tests, such as the Regents exams. And while that is, of course, important to be able to prepare students for those exams, oftentimes kind of pigeonholing writing assignments to focus on just those specific narrow prompts limit the kind of range of writing that we're doing in our classroom. So when we're thinking about writing in the English classroom, we want to think about engaging students in a process approach that allows them to go through drafting, revising, and editing. We want to be able to use mentor text to help students craft their writing, meaning that we are using the writing of real writers out in the world that students can then look at and study to determine what makes those pieces effective and then emulate those moves in their own writing. We want to encourage students to pay attention to organization, detail, elaboration, and voice. Thinking particularly about who your audience is and how you can best communicate to them. You want to rely on feedback of others. Again, this course is kind of founded in the idea that learning is social, and so providing students with the opportunity for collaboration in their writing is essential. And we want to avoid that really formulaic writing where we're asking students to kind of just plug in facts or plug in details, but instead really thinking about creating writing that is organic and cohesive and models the writing that we see that exists in the real world. Now, it can be a little bit trickier to think about where writing comes into play in the math classroom because the language of math focuses more heavily on representations and symbols. But that does not mean that writing cannot hold a place in the math classroom as well. The most common writing application in math is an open-ended response question, which can resemble a multiple-part word problem where students are going to explain, justify, describe, estimate, or analyze particular mathematical calculations. They may also be asked to persuade others of their reasoning or adapt math to real-world situations where they can create a plan or explain a construction. Additionally, as a pre-writing activity, students in math can think through the process before beginning writing and thinking through explaining the steps, how they would solve the problem, using details, reasoning, and evidence from the problem itself, as well as their own computations for support. We want to make sure that in math, we're following writing the way that mathematicians do it. So we're going to be very exact in our justifications and explanations. We're going to use math and calculations to support the words that we're choosing. We're making sure that we are using precise mathematical vocabulary and that we're providing those reasons and examples. And that's best when we can apply this in real-world situations. As we've mentioned in previous modules, this disciplinary approach to literacy and an inquiry approach to learning really favors depth over kind of superficial fact-based learning. And so when we're thinking about meaningful historical instruction, writing becomes an essential component of that depth. Social studies as a discipline has always valued writing as a way of interpreting, organizing, and clarifying the many dimensions of the subject. When historians write, they create timelines with accompanying narratives, synthesize information or evidence from multiple sources, emphasize coherent organization of ideas, grapple with multiple ideas and large quantities of information, and create essays based on the principles of argument, taking a position and then using evidence to support and maintain that position. Writing in science can go beyond just copying notes or creating lab reports. Instead, in classes where writing is used as a tool for thinking and understanding, science teachers incorporate a variety of practices to motivate students to write reflectively and thoughtfully each day. Many use scientific notebooks or science journals where students do more than answer questions. They illustrate and chart, they write about their observations, or they engage with written dialogues with another student scientist. Such tools might include vocabulary charts, where students conceptualize key terms through illustrations or connections, or they might even write stories about their processes. In this application of writing for science, scientists are using precise vocabulary. They're composing in maybe phrases, bullets, and sketches or graphs. They tend to use the passive voice to take a more objective tone. They favor exactness over craft or elaboration, and they communicate in a systematic form. So again, we reiterate here the concept that just like the way that reading looks different across each of the disciplines, writing looks different in each of the disciplines as well. And the way that that writing manifests and the way that the length of it, the organization of it, the terms used, all depends on the discipline itself. Again, a lot of the information in this PowerPoint was taken from this book called This is Disciplinary Literacy, Reading, Writing, Thinking, and Doing, content area by content area. I cannot recommend this book enough. I know I've mentioned it before, but if you are interested in really kind of digging into what reading and writing in the particular disciplines looks like, this is an excellent resource for you.